Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and tonight I'm going to be reviewing to you the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles for the Nintendo Switch. Normally, I don't like to review collections on this channel, but considering that these are two 3DS games in the Ace Attorney series that have never been localized until now, I'm willing to make an exception, especially because the two games were made with the idea of it being a duology in mind, so it feels like one giant game that was just chopped in two for time constraints. Kind of like Sonic 3 and Knuckles now that I think about it. So for those of you that haven't played an Ace Attorney game before, you play as Ryunosuke Naruhodo. Try saying that 5 times fast. And he's a lawyer who will listen to witnesses testify in the courtroom, and he will have to point out where there's a contradiction in their testimony, often by shouting out a very satisfying "objection" or "yes" in this very early case because he's still a trainee. Now, you don't just pick out evidence and present it, you also have the ability to press the witnesses to get more information out of them, and in a nice carryover from Professor Layton versus Phoenix Wright, you can also have multiple witnesses on the stand at once, and sometimes you can interrupt one person's testimony because the other witness will have something to say, and you'll do a very satisfying "excuse me" to announce that you're interrupting the other witnesses mid-sentence. This is a great refinement over the system introduced in Versus, because one, you'll often have at most 3 witnesses at a time as opposed to the obnoxious 10 in the last case of that game, but also pursuing a new line of questioning will never penalize you. In some of the Ace Attorney games, you're often told, don't press too much, or you're an idiot for trying to niggle over every little thing. But when you actually get new information, it's always rewarding and it's always satisfactory. You'll never have to feel like an idiot for pursuing a train of thought. In addition, this is the first Ace Attorney game that really utilizes the jury. It was hinted at in Apollo Justice, but it really wasn't used to its full potential. Starting with Case 3, you'll have 6 jury members that will ultimately decide the fate of the defendant. However, a lot of times they'll make snap judgments because they're just members of the layman. They're not professionals in the law field. So they'll pronounce the defendant guilty, but Ryunosuke, I'm just going to call him Ryu from now on, has the ability to do a summation examination where he can ask the witnesses, like, are you sure you really want to go through with that ruling? And so you can pit the jury members against each other to make them question their reasoning for why they think the defendant is guilty, therefore prolonging the trial more. I think this is a really cool mechanic, and I'm really surprised that since this is a prequel that it doesn't explain why the jury went away in the later Ace Attorney games. I wish maybe there was like some kind of cool explanation of like, was there a big scandal that involved the jury that caused the main games to ignore it? Why was it that in Apollo Justice it had to only be teased at and then didn't appear again in Dual Destinies or Spirit of Justice? The final big new addition to the series that really helps it feel stand out, besides the fact that the presentation takes a lot of cues from Versus, we'll get to that later, is Sherlock Holmes, who adds an entirely new gameplay mechanic. For those of you that don't know, it's just Sherlock Holmes, but with the S switched around. But anyway, during the investigations, he will sometimes make deductions, and you'll often see him dancing around the screen with really cool 3D camera angles, pointing spotlights and snapping his fingers to observe what might have happened in the environment. But however, his deductions are often slightly off. Like he might say, I think that the teacup holds the answer, when actually it's something next to the teacup. So your job will be to search the environment in full 3D and point out what it actually is. That is the next step in the deduction. The only problem with these is that when you press the A button, that lets you zoom in on things, which is cool, and it also gives you a little hint about like, could this be the right option? But the game doesn't tell you that you can do that. So in one of the earliest examples, I was asked, what caused this witness to have a scratch on her hand? And I said, oh, well, there's a cat in that picture, so the picture is the answer. But no, the picture is the wrong thing, and the game makes you feel like an idiot for daring to suggest it. What you have to do is you have to press the A button to zoom in on the picture, and then choose the cat. But seeing as the picture is of a woman holding a cat, it's like, what else would you have picked? What, the woman scratched herself? That's just stupid. Besides that, the game generally does a really good job of explaining its concepts, and most of the time you feel like you know what you have to do. However, that being said, I realize that wording might have been slightly off. Sometimes the game's writing doesn't do a good enough job of allowing you to know how you're going to present your idea. You might think, oh, I know exactly what I'm supposed to do here, but you have to go at the same pace that Ryonosuke does. So if you've figured it out first and he still hasn't, you'll have to go at his pace. Thankfully, the game gives you the option to pull up the chat log and be like, what did people say before? And you can usually do a pretty good job of figuring out exactly what the game wants to ask you. Other times, you might know what the contradiction is, but you won't know what piece of evidence to use, and then oftentimes, the game will even show two pieces of evidence at once, and you'll be like, but that's the one I presented earlier, what the heck? Nevertheless, Ace Attorney games have been like that since the very beginning, and this game is no exception. But the good news is that once these segments pass, it's pretty much guaranteed that you're going to go back to loving every second of this. It's really hard to hate Ace Attorney once you've figured out what the problem is, which segues perfectly into, Paul, okay, why is there a stupid green box in the upper right corner of your screen that just ruins the UI? Well, I chose to play this in story mode, which is the ability for the game to basically play itself. You could say that this is Capcom's answer to a super guide, basically allowing the game to take over if you find that it's too hard. You can toggle this on and off at any time, and if you're a true purist and you want to figure it out exactly by yourself, you can even turn off the toggle altogether in the options menu. But what I really like about story mode is that you have the option of choosing how fast the game is going to autoplay. So, if you, say for example, are struggling during a cross-examination and only want to know the contradictory statement without knowing what the piece of evidence is, then you can do that and then immediately turn story mode off. This is also good for people that don't have really good logic and reasoning skills if they want to experience the story without having to worry about a let's play. If they want to have the game for themselves and take it at their own pace, they can choose how fast the story will advance and they won't have to worry about trying to think about, uh-oh, which piece of evidence do I use? I can't reason my way out of a paper bag. You'd be surprised how many people are like that. As for the game itself, the presentation here is really spectacular. The characters are in full 3D models, and there are a lot of new expressions and animations that haven't been seen before in the Ace Attorney series. The music also takes a lot of cues from Versus by having a lot of accordions and violin pieces to perfectly set the time period. And the score, it starts out kind of basic, but then it gradually gets more and more epic until you're just like, dang. Why wasn't Ace Attorney this grand before, besides Professor Layton versus Phoenix Wright? But I think what I love the most about Great Ace Attorney is the fact that the writing is much more honest than previous games. Now what I mean by that is, not only does this tell a good story, but the game is willing to call a spade a spade. Now if you don't know what that phrase means, let me use a quick analogy here. Some of you may have heard me talking in real life, and note that sometimes I say things that might offend someone of a different culture. Like I might be like, oh, if I ever go to Japan, I'd better be prepared to be in Munchkin Land because everyone there is a bunch of midgets. You might be like, no, Paul, that's so rude. How dare you say that about the Japanese people? They can't help it if they're short. But that's the kind of stuff that is said in this game all the time, and this was written by Japanese people. So not only are they making fun of themselves, but they also make fun of the English, because most of this game takes place in Great Britain and there are English-speaking people in the game. The English people will make fun of the Japanese, and not only will they make fun of it, but oftentimes they'll just be talking and be like, that was a really bad sentence structure. You Japanese people really need to rephrase things. And it just feels like the characters are being extremely honest. And admittedly, some people might not like how brutal some of these stereotype pointings out can be, such as when the characters not once but twice make fun of how the Japanese people have shortened Shakespeare's name. But in my opinion, I think it's great that it's showing that Nintendo's censorship is getting to the point where they're not so worried about political correctness anymore, where they don't have to censor the silliest thing because people are a bunch of babies that can't handle mature content, and this isn't even a mature rated game. Speaking of the writing, most of the time it's really good. Sometimes they fall into the territories of it sounding weird in an English ear, like when characters say "san" at the end of certain characters' names. But for the most part, it manages to be a lot more serious than most Ace Attorney games, while at the same time maintaining a relative sense of lightheartedness. Also, I really like how even though they're two separate 3DS games, they manage to still pack a grand narrative where every single case at the end is connected in this wild, crazy flowchart web type of way. I love how the smallest pieces of dialogue can have huge implications once you get later on in the story, and it feels oh so satisfying to finally take down the mastermind at the end. Now, since this is a Chronicles release, since in Japan this would be a re-release of these two games, there are of course going to be a lot of really cool bonus features to make up for the long wait that we Americans had to endure for them figuring out just to change the S in Sherlock Holmes' name. You can listen to most of the music in an in-game soundtrack player, and if you have the From the Vaults DLC, you can even listen. I can't speak today. You can even listen to beta music that was scrapped from the main game, so you can hear what the music was originally supposed to sound like in drafts, and you even have the composers writing out commentary for why the song was rejected. You also get artwork and explanations from the artist. You have autosaves, multiple save files, achievements, and there's even some Japanese cartoons slash production videos that were made that you can view in a gallery. Admittedly, they're all fully voiced in Japanese and don't have an English language, but at least they have subtitles at the bottom of the screen so that you can know what's being said. There are also accolades where you can have the characters talking to each other about very random, light-hearted stuff just in case you thought this game was too serious by Ace Attorney standards. Overall, there's so much stuff in this game, and it's not even priced at $60. This is actually only a $40 game, and for that, I think you're at a steal of a price, with 10 cases, several bonus videos, including one where Phoenix and Maya make a cameo, 8 accolades, achievements, and beta music if you get the DLC. This is a fantastic package. Admittedly, some of the characters are kind of annoying. Some of the phrasing used to be more faithful to the Japanese language sounds really weird compared to how we Americans talk. But overall, I think they're nitpicks in the grand scheme of things. If you've been holding off on Ace Attorney games before now because they're just too silly and satirical, I think this game will make you a believer. It stands by itself really well, and you can easily make this your first Ace Attorney experience, as the game does a great job of feeling like it's its own game without being too tied down to what was already established in the main universe. I think you should definitely give this a try, and even if you haven't, or even if you cheated and watched a Let's Player play the unofficial fan translation before, I think you might really love being able to figure things out in proper English, and as well as getting all the bonus materials that were not included in the main game. So with that, I give this a very high recommendation, and I'm most likely going to put this in my best games of 2021 list. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Let me know if somehow I left anything out in the comment section. It almost took me like 13 takes to get this done, so I really hope you appreciate what I was able to do. So until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and you get no objections from me if you decide to download this. Bye!